Hello, this is Wendy Barlow from Cohen, Tucker, and Ades. Coming a little early than usual. Do this a little earlier just because of scheduling conflicts later in the day, but I'm here to discuss today asylum. Essentially, what I'm going to do is just give a brief overview of eligibility and address some common questions we get about the process. So, what is asylum, or what people commonly refer to as political asylum? Asylum is a form of protection the US government will grant to an individual if they can show that they've been persecuted or have a well founded fear of future persecution in their native country or the country where they were last living if they're stateless, and essentially they can't get protection from their government. And what asylum gets you is the ability to live in the US. You're also authorized to work. You can apply for a travel document, refugee travel document, which is a document issued by the US government that allows you to travel internationally and return. You also have a path to a green card and eventually citizenship. So, how do you get asylum? To apply for asylum, you have to either be physically present in the US or at a border crossing or port of entry. So, you could be at a border crossing along the southern border, you could be coming in through an airport, be entering on a ship. There are many ways to apply for asylum, but it is important that you know that you have to either be physically in the US or at a port of entry. You cannot apply for asylum from abroad. To attain similar benefits, there's a process called refugee status. That's a conversation for another day. So, what is persecution? Persecution is not every bad thing that happens to someone. Unfortunately, people suffer from bad things all the time. So, for example, being a victim of general crime does not make you eligible for asylum. So, if you were robbed in your home country, that's not necessarily going to make you eligible for asylum. If there's general country conditions such as ongoing war, that generally is not going to make you eligible for asylum. Again, I'm going to get into some more technicalities, but these are general rules. What asylum is you have to show typically an individualized fear of persecution. And that's either done by showing you've been subjected to past persecution. And persecution is things like imprisonment, beatings, assaults. It can be even more horrific, such as rape. It can be murder of friends and family members. It encompasses a lot of different types of harm. And it doesn't have to be just one bad thing. What will happen is that the adjudicator will look at the totality of the circumstances, the cumulative effect of everything. So if things started out as taunting and threats, but started escalating, they're going to take a look at all those things. You also have to understand you don't actually have had to have suffered harm in the past. This is something you could fear if you were to go back. An example that we come across frequently is someone who is member of the LGBT community, but in their country they stay closeted because of fear of harm. They end up in the US where they feel like they can be their true selves, and now they don't want to go back in the closet effectively. So they can file for asylum because maybe in their country people are routinely beaten for being a member of the LGBTQ community. Maybe they're subject to criminal prosecution. There's a lot of things that may help this happens with. We've also seen it with religious converts. Someone comes from a country where they have been born and raised in one religion. There's not a lot of opportunity to explore other religions. They come to the US, they explore religion, and they convert. And that may or may not be something that is accepted in their home country. Aside from that, I mean, there's a lot of different changes that could happen to a person. But these are just to give you some examples. Asylum is not just based on political opinion. We get that a lot. Everybody refers to it as political asylum, but you can actually apply for asylum if you fear persecution on account of your race, religion, nationality, political opinion, or membership in a particular social group. Now, it's important to keep in mind it doesn't just include those specific topics. So, like, you don't necessarily have to be a member of the opposition. If you can show the government thinks that you are a member or otherwise affiliated with it. So essentially, you can show eligibility if the persecutor you fear, whether it's the government or individuals the government is not going to protect you from, believe you hold this characteristic. Now, political opinion, race, religion, nationality, those are pretty straightforward. The topic we get a lot is questions about his membership in a particular social group. As much as it sounds like, it's not a catch all. It's not a category where if you don't meet one of the other four, you're going to just file under that and you're going to be fine. Membership in a particular social group has very specific criteria. You have to show that your proposed social group is composed of members who share a common immutable characteristic. You have to define this group with what's called particularity. And then you have to show this group is socially distinct within the society in question. So essentially within where you lived before you came to the US. So I'm going to break those three topics down a little bit. So the first, common immutable characteristic. That is something that you shouldn't be required or cannot change. For example, some kind of biological trait that you have. You obviously can't change that. A belief system that is so ingrained in you that it would be unconscionable to require you to change that. Your social status, shared past experiences. So these are the types of things that are immutable characteristics. Social groups, again, there is room to define them depending on your circumstances. But just to give you an idea of what have been found to be social groups, things like groups based on clan or tribal membership, groups based on gender identity or sexual orientation, groups based on family or kinship relationships, former service in the military or police, and witnesses to criminal activity. Again, these are case specific. So the fact that maybe one of these things you fall into this doesn't mean it's going to apply in your application. What does defined with particularity mean? Essentially, the particularity requirement creates boundaries for the group. There's no minimum or maximum members of a group, but there has to be some limitations. So effectively, not everybody in the country could qualify. You have to define this group that you're a part of so that there's some kind of boundaries to it, whether that is based on sex or gender or occupation or membership, like I said, in a clan or a tribe. These are the types of things that you use to define groups. There's been attempts to define groups by things like wealth. That gets a little harder because there's no clear definition of what is wealthy. Again, not foreclosing that type of argument, but it does give you an idea of that this is not just I'm part of a group. The last one is the group must be socially distinct. That means your characteristic, whatever that may be, has to be distinct within your society, so where you're coming from. This doesn't mean it has to be visible per se. It just needs to be something that would be set you apart from everybody else, or your group apart from everybody else. It differentiates your group from the rest of society. Overall, asylum based on membership in a particular social group can be very difficult to pursue. It does not mean you should not pursue it, but it's not, again, something where I don't meet one of the other four criteria, so we're just going to go with this and I'm going to get asylum because some bad things have happened to me. This is something that has to be structured. Most of the time, you have to propose an actual group, meaning you have to define the group and give it to the adjudicator. If you're an immigration court, you often have to write a memo explaining the group and why you meet that group. So there are things to keep in mind. Moving forward a little bit from the general eligibility, once you show that you have a fear of subjected to past persecution or have a well-founded fear of future persecution, and it's based on a nexus, meaning to a nexus between what you fear is going to happen or has happened to one of those protected grounds, which is race, religion, nationality, political opinion, or membership in a particular social group. The last thing is to look at whether there are any mandatory bars. Again, not everybody who's eligible for asylum will be granted asylum. If you've persecuted people in the past yourself, you will not be eligible. If you've engaged in terrorist activities, you will not be eligible. Certain particularly serious crimes will keep you from getting asylum. So there are several other factors if there's anything negative in your history to take into account. And then finally, it's whether the US government should grant you asylum as a matter of discretion. The matter of discretion is based on is based on, no adverse factors. For the most part, if you've been persecuted or have a well-founded fear, you should be granted asylum as an exercise of discretion, generally speaking. However, if you have things such as arrest record, criminal prosecution, again, not related to political opinion or one of these protected grounds, but for example, if you've been arrested for drunk driving or domestic violence or petty larceny, these are all things they're going to take into account. If you have been accused of serious crimes, it could be taken into account. So keep this in mind when you're moving forward. If you have questions about eligibility for asylum, please call us at 212-840-0050. We'd be happy to assess your case and determine if you have a good claim. Again, we don't make the ultimate decision, so we can't guarantee you will be granted, but we do try to assess claims and let people know the strengths and weaknesses. Thank you. Have a great day.